Bing bongy bong, bing bongy bong. This is Joe, the bearded historian. He'll tell you an interesting story. Be careful of his soldiers, they can be brats. This is Angel, she's an entity. She'll cause chaos and plant her hands at you. This is Sue, she likes spirits, not the alcohol. She's the reason this channel exists. This is David, he likes fire trucks. He's here occasionally. Bing bongy bong, bing bongy bong, bing bongy bong. We preserve his story. Okay, if you haven't heard, we're doing a thing for March. It is on the video I posted yesterday. Please check it out. I'm excited and hoping many people enjoy this thing we're trying to do. In the meantime, are you ready? Here we go. Shout out time. Here's a shout out just for you. You support me, so I support you. This shout out is for a friend. So you know. Okay. Oh, it's taking a moment. Come on. There it goes. Alright, there we go. Now the race is on. Alright, we've got a Lynch and down. There's Sheena, Airborne. I see the Griffins. Heather. I like how the Griffins looks like a chocolate duck. I think it's supposed to be a dog. I just noticed the ears. We've got Sandra and visiting. All out. Exploits is kind of catching up over there in the back. Walk, run. We've got Afromax. Looks like it's going to be walk, run. Okay, hang on. Okay, and it is walk, run, walk, walk. It says I walk every day, venues, temporary events, sites that are rare, hidden gems, and or disappearing. Unedited, unnarrated. My videos let you feel as if you're there. We are also mostly unedited. Mostly I say because I do splice on our shoutouts and intro. And today, of course, the pictures that go over Joe's ramblings. Unnarrated is hard for me because I don't do silence very well. Anyway, about our walk, run friend. Beautiful places, very interesting places. So check them out, like, share, comment, and let them know we sent you by. Have a good day. Alright, Mr. Bud, tell us something interesting.
Well, this month is Women's History Month. And, you know, you look at some of the more famous women in history, you can go all the way back to Catherine the Great, ruler of Russia. You got Joan of Arc, who fought valiantly to achieve a victory, only to be burned at the stake. You had Susan B. Anthony, who fought hard for women's rights here in the United States, as well as another couple decades later, we had Amelia Earhart, who became famous for her airborne endeavors. Now, there was one lady who I was always kind of a fan of, with my background in chemistry and physics, named of Marie Curie. Now, interestingly enough, she was from Poland, and at that time Poland was under the control of the Russian government. They were kind of like a satellite state. Her given name was Slodakowska, born in 1867, and was a naturalized French physicist and chemist, conducting pioneering research in radioactivity. She would go on to be the first woman to win a Nobel Prize, as well win the Nobel Prize twice and the only person ever to win a Nobel Prize in two different scientific fields. Her husband, Pierre Curie, was the co-winner of the first Nobel Prize, making them the first ever married couple to win the Nobel Prize and launching the Curie family legacy of 5 Nobel Prizes. She was, in 1906, the first woman to also become a professor at the University of Paris. Now, just a quick snapshot of her her trophy gallery: Nobel Prize in Physics, the Davy Medal, the Matteucci Medal, the Actonian Prize, Elliott Creston Medal, the Albert Medal, Nobel Prize in Chemistry, Willard Gibbs Award, the Cameron Prize for Therapeutics of the University of Edinburgh. You know, she had quite a run of modern, lessons that she was able to share with the world at the time. Incredibly bright with the IQ to go with it. Now, she was originally born in Warsaw, that was the Kingdom of Poland, part of the Russian Empire. She studied at Warsaw's clandestine Flying University and began the practical scientific training in Warsaw. At 1891, aged 24, she followed her elder sister, Bronswala, to study in Paris, where she earned higher degrees and conducted her subsequent scientific work. In 1895, she married the French physicist Pierre Curie, and that's when they shared the 1903 Nobel Prize in Physics with him, and with physicist Henry Becquerel for their pioneering work developing the theory of radioactivity, a term she coined. In 1906, Pierre Curie would die in a street accident, and later in 1911, she would win her Nobel Prize in Chemistry for the discovery of elements of polonium and radium, and using techniques she invented for isolating radioactive isotopes. Now, under her direction, the world's first studies were conducted into the treatment of neoplasms by the use of radioactive isotopes. She founded the Curie Institute in Paris in 1920, the Curie Institute in Warsaw in 1932, and both remained major medical research centers. During World War I, she developed mobile radiography units to provide X-ray services to field hospitals. Now, while a French citizen, she used both surnames, never lost her sense of her Polish identity. She taught her daughters the Polish language and took them on visits to Poland. She named the first chemical element she discovered, polonium, after her native country. Now, we'll take and peek a little bit of her life. Again, in Congress, Poland and the Russian Empire, 1867, the fifth and youngest child of well-known teachers Bronislava Boruska and Władysław Sladowski. The elder siblings of Maria were Zofia, born in 1862, Joseph, born in 1863, Bronswala in 1865, and Helena in 1866. Now, both parental and maternal sides, the family had lost their property and fortunes through patriotic involvements in the Polish national uprising aimed at restoring their independence. The most recent of this was happening in 1863 to 1865. This condemned the subsequent generation, including Maria and her elder siblings, to a difficult struggle to get ahead in life. Maria's paternal grandfather, Joseph Sladowski, had been principal of the Lublin primary school attended by Boleslaw Prus, who became a leading figure in Polish literature. Now, Władysław taught mathematics and physics, subjects that Maria was to pursue, and was also the director of 2 Warsaw Gymnasia, secondary schools for boys. After Russian authorities eliminated laboratory instruction from the Polish schools, he brought much of the laboratory equipment home and instructed his children in the use. He eventually was fired by his Russian supervisors for pro-Polish sentiments and forced to take lower-paying posts. The family also lost money on a bad investment, eventually chose to supplement their income by lodging boys in the house. Now, Maria's mother operated a prestigious Warsaw boarding school for girls. She resigned from the position after Maria was born. She sadly died of tuberculosis in May of 1878 when Maria was 10 years old. Less than 3 years later, Maria's oldest sibling, Zofia, also died of typhus contracted from a boarder. Maria's father was an atheist, his mother a devout Catholic. The deaths of Maria's mother and sister caused her to give up Catholicism and became agnostic. When she was 10 years old, Maria began attending the boarding school of J. Swarska. Next, she attended a gymnasium for girls, at which she graduated in 1883 with a gold medal. After a collapse, possibly due to depression, she spent the following year in the countryside with relatives of her father, and the next year with her father in Warsaw, where she did some tutoring. Unable to enroll in a regular institution for higher education because she was a woman, she and her sister Bronswala became involved in a clandestine flying university, sometimes translated into a floating university, a Polish patriotic institution of higher learning that admitted women students. Yay, Poland. Now, Maria made an agreement with her sister Bronswala that she would give her financial assistance during Bronswala's medical studies in Paris in exchange for similar assistance 2 years later. In connection with this, Maria took a position first as a home tutor in Warsaw, then for 2 years as a governess in Suzuki with a landed family, the Zwarskis, who were relatives of her father. While working for the latter family, she fell in love with their son, Kamil Zwarski, a future eminent mathematician. Her parents rejected the idea of his marrying the penniless relative, and Kamil was unable to oppose them. Maria's loss of the relationship for Zwarski was tragic for both. He soon earned a doctorate and pursued an academic career as a mathematician, becoming a professor and rector of the Krakow University. Still, as an old man and a mathematics professor in Warsaw Polytech, he would sit contemplatively before the statue of Maria Skłodowska that had been erected in 1935 before the Radium Institute, which she had founded in 1932. At the beginning of 1890, Bronswala, who was a few months earlier had married Kamil Zwarski, a Polish physician and social and political activist, invited Maria to join them in Paris. Maria declined because she could not afford the university tuition. It would take her a year and a half longer to gather the necessary funds. She was helped by her father, who was able to secure a more lucrative position again. All the time, she continued to educate herself, reading books, exchanging letters, and being tutored herself. In early 1889, she returned home to her father in Warsaw. She continued working as a governess and remained there until late 1891. She tutored, studying at the Flying University, and began her practical scientific training in a chemical laboratory at the Museum of Industry and Agriculture at Kurowskie Przemysł 66 near Warsaw's Old Town. The laboratory was run by her cousin, Joseph Bursky, who had been an assistant in St. Petersburg to the Russian chemist Dmitry Mendeleev. Now, that name's familiar, and we're going to have to look it up later. In 1891, she left Poland for France. In Paris, Maria, or Marie as she would be known in France, briefly found shelter with her sister and brother-in-law before renting a garret close to the university in the Latin Quarter and proceeding with her studies in physics, chemistry, and mathematics at the University of Paris, where she enrolled in late 1891. Now, she subsisted on her meager resources, keeping herself warm during cold winters by wearing all the clothes she had. She focused so hard on her studies that she sometimes forgot to eat. Hi, Angel. Skłodowska studied during the day and tutored evenings, barely earning her keep. In 1893, she was awarded a degree in physics and began to work in the industrial laboratory of Gabriel Lippmann. Meanwhile, she continued studying at the University of Paris, and with the aid of a fellowship, she was able to earn a second degree in 1894. Now, Skłodowska had begun her scientific career in Paris with the investigation of the magnetic properties of various steels, commissioned by the Society for the Encouragement of the National Industry. That same year, Pierre Curie entered her life. It was the mutual interest in natural scientists that drew them together. Pierre Curie was the instructor at the City of Paris Industrial Physics and Chemistry Higher Education Institution. That's a mouthful. They were introduced by Polish scientist Joseph Wierusz Kowalski, who had learned that she was looking for a larger laboratory space, something that Wierusz Kowalski thought Pierre could access. Through Curie did not have a large laboratory, he was able to find some space for Skłodowska where she was able to begin work. Their mutual passion for science brought them increasingly closer, and they began to develop feelings for one another. Eventually, Pierre proposed marriage, but at first Skłodowska did not accept, as she was still planning to go back to her native country. Curie, however, declared that he was ready to move with her to Poland, even if it meant being reduced to teaching French. Meanwhile, for the 1894 summer break, Słodowska returned to Warsaw, where she visited her family. She was still laboring under the illusion that she would be able to work in her chosen field in Poland, but she was denied a place at the Krakow University because of sexism in academia. Bad Polish. A letter from Pierre convinced her to return to Paris to pursue a PhD. At Słodowska's insistence, Curie had written up his research on magnetism and received his own doctorate in March of 1895. He was also promoted to professor at the school. A contemporary quip would call Słodowska Pierre's biggest discovery. Now, in 1895, they were married in Sioux. Neither wanted a religious service. Curie's dark blue outfit, worn instead of a bridal gown, would serve her for many years as a laboratory outfit. The two shared pastimes, long bicycle trips and journeys abroad, which brought them even closer. In Pierre, Marie had found a new love, partner, and a scientific collaborator on whom she could depend. Well, in 1895, William Roentgen discovered the existence of X-rays, though the mechanism behind the production was not yet understood. A year later, Henry Becquerel discovered that uranium salts emitted rays that resembled X-rays in their penetrating power. He demonstrated that this radiation, unlike phosphorescence, did not depend on an external source of energy, but seemed to arise spontaneously from the uranium itself. Influenced by these two important discoveries, Curie decided to look into the uranium rays as a possible field of research for a thesis. Now, she used an innovative technique to investigate the samples. 15 years earlier, her husband and his brother had developed a version of the electrometer, a sensitive device for measuring an electric charge, commonly referred to as Joe. Using her husband's electrometer, she discovered that uranium rays cause the air around a sample to conduct electricity. Using this technique, her first result was finding that the activity of the uranium compounds depended only on the quantity of uranium present. She hypothesized that the radiation was not the outcome of some interaction of molecules, but must come from the atom itself. This hypothesis was an important step in disproving the assumption that atoms were indivisible. In 1897, her daughter Irene was born. To support her family, Curie began teaching at the École Normale Supérieure. The Curies did not have a dedicated laboratory. Most of their research was carried out in a converted shed next to the ESPCI. The shed, formerly a medical school dissecting room, was poorly ventilated and not even waterproof. They were unaware of the deleterious effects of the radiation exposure attendant on their continued unprotected work with the radioactive substances, and the ESPCI did not sponsor her research, but she would receive subsidies from the metallurgical and mining companies and from various organizations and governments. Well, Curie's systematic studies included two uranium minerals, pitchblende and torbanite, also known as chalcolite. Her electrometer showed that pitchblende was 4 times as active as uranium itself, while chalcolite was twice as active. She concluded that if her earlier researches were relating to the quantity of uranium to its activity were correct, then these two minerals must contain small quantities of another substance that was far more active than uranium. She began a systematic search for additional substances that emitted radiation, and in 1898 she discovered that the element thorium was also radioactive. Pierre Curie was increasingly intrigued by her work, and by mid-1898 she was so invested in it that he decided to drop his own work in crystals and join her. The research idea, writes Reed, was her own, and no one helped her formulate it, and although she took it to her husband for his opinion, she clearly established her ownership of it. She later recorded the fact that twice in her biography of her husband, to ensure that there was no chance whatever of any ambiguity, it is likely that already at this early stage of her career she realized that many scientists would find it difficult to believe that a woman could be capable of the original work in which she was involved.
How dare she?
Yes. She was acutely aware of the importance of promptly publishing her discoveries and established her priority. Had not Becquerel 2 years earlier presented his discovery to the Académie des Sciences the day after he made it, credit for the discovery of radioactivity and even a Nobel Prize would have gone to Sylvanus Thomson. Curie chose the same rapid means of publication. Her paper, given a brief and simple account of her work, was presented to the Academy on the 12th of April, by her former professor, Gabriel Lippmann. Even so, just as Thomson had been beaten by Becquerel, so Curie was beaten in the race to tell the discovery that thorium gives off rays of the same way as uranium 2 months earlier. Gerhard Karl Schmidt had published his own findings in Berlin. Now, at that time, no one else in the world of physics had noticed what Curie was recorded in a sentence of her paper describing how much greater were the activities of pitchblende and chalcolite than uranium itself. The fact is very remarkable and leads to the belief that these minerals may contain an element which is more active than uranium. She later would recall how she felt a passionate desire to verify this hypothesis as rapidly as possible. On the 14th of April, 1898, the Curies optimistically weighed out a 100-gram sample of pitchblende and ground it with a pestle and mortar. They did not realize at the time what they were searching for was present in such minute quantities that they would eventually have to process tons of the ore. In July of 1898, Curie and her husband published a joint paper announcing the existence of an element they named polonium in honor of her native Poland, which would be for another 20 years remain partitioned among 3 empires, Russia, Austria, and the Prussian Empire. On December 26, 1898, the Curies would announce the existence of a second element, which they named radium from the Latin word ray, and in the course of their research, they also coined the word radioactivity. Now, to prove the discoveries beyond any doubt, the Curies sought to isolate polonium and radium in pure form. Pitchblende is a complex mineral. A chemical separation of the constituents was an arduous task. The discovery of polonium had been relatively easy. Chemically, it resembles the element bismuth, and polonium was the only bismuth-like substance in the ore. Radium, however, was more elusive. It is closely related chemically to barium, and pitchblende contains both elements. By 1898, the Curies had obtained traces of radium, but appreciable quantities, uncontaminated with barium, were still beyond reach. The Curies undertook the arduous task of separating out one radium salt by differential crystallization. From a ton of pitchblende, 1/10 of a gram of radium chloride was separated in 1902. In 1910, she isolated pure radium metal. She had never succeeded in isolating polonium, which has a half-life of only 138 days.
Wow.
Yeah. Now, between 1898 and 1902, the Curies published, jointly or separately, a total of 32 scientific papers, including one that announced when exposed to radium, diseased tumor-forming cells were destroyed faster than healthy cells. In 1900, Curie became the first woman faculty member of the École Normale Supérieure, and her husband joined the faculty of the University of Paris. In 1902, she visited Poland on the occasion of her father's death. In June of 1903, supervised by Gabriel Lippmann, Curie was awarded her doctorate from the University of Paris. That month, the couple were invited to the Royal Institution in London to give a speech on radioactivity. Being a woman, she was prevented from speaking, and Pierre Curie alone was allowed to speak.
Of course.
Meanwhile, the new industry began developing based on radium. The Curie did not have a patent on their discovery and benefited little from this increasingly profitable business. Now, in December of 1903, the Royal Swedish Academy of Sciences awarded Pierre Curie, Marie Curie, and Henry Becquerel the Nobel Prize in Physics in recognition of the extraordinary services they have rendered in the joint researches on radiation phenomena discovered by Professor Henry Becquerel. At first, the committee had intended to only honor Pierre Curie and Henry Becquerel, but a committee member and advocate for women scientists, Swedish mathematician Magnus Gustav Mittag-Leffler, alerted Pierre to the situation, and after his complaint, Marie's name was added to the nomination. He's like, "You get my wife in here, dude." Marie Curie was the first woman to be awarded the Nobel Prize. Curie and her husband declined to go to Stockholm to receive the prize in person. They were too busy with their work, and Pierre Curie, who disliked public ceremony, was feeling increasingly ill. As Nobel laureates were required to deliver a lecture, the Curies finally undertook the trip in 1905. The award money allowed the Curies to hire their first laboratory assistants. Following the award of the Nobel Prize, and galvanized by an offer from the University of Geneva, which offered Pierre Curie a position, The University of Paris gave him a professorship and the chair of physics, although the Curie still did not have a proper laboratory.
Oops.
Upon Pierre Curie's complaint, the University of Paris relented and agreed to furnish a new laboratory, but it wouldn't be ready until 1906. Well, in 1904, Curie gave birth to their second daughter, Eve. She hired Polish governesses to teach her daughters her native language and sent them or took them on visits to Poland. In 1906, in April, Pierre Curie was killed in a road accident. Walking across the Rue Dauphine in heavy rain, he was struck by a horse-drawn vehicle and fell under its wheels, fracturing his skull and killing him instantly. Curie was devastated by her husband's death, and on May 13th, 1906, the physics department at the University of Paris decided to retain the chair that had been created for her late husband and offer it to Marie. She accepted, hoping to create a world-class laboratory as a tribute to her husband Pierre. She was the first woman to become a professor at the University of Paris. Now, Curie's quest to create a new laboratory did not end with the University of Paris, however. In her later years, she headed the Radium Institute, now the Curie Institute, a radioactivity laboratory created for her by the Pasteur Institute and the University of Paris. The initiative for creating the Radium Institute had come in 1909 from Pierre-Paul Emile Roux, the director of the Pasteur Institute, who had been disappointed that the University of Paris had not been giving Curie a proper laboratory and suggested she move to the Pasteur Institute. Only then, with the threat of her leaving, did the University of Paris relent. Don't go! The Curie Pavilion became a joint initiative of the University of Paris and the Pasteur Institute. In 1910, Curie succeeded in isolating radium. She also defined an international standard for radioactive emissions that was eventually named for her and Pierre, the Curie. Nevertheless, in 1911, the French Academy of Sciences failed by one of two votes to elect her to membership in the Academy. Elected instead was Edouard Branly, a inventor who helped Guglielmo Marconi develop the wireless telegraph. It was only half a century later, in 1962, that a doctoral student of Curie's, Margaret Perry, became the first woman elected to membership in the Academy.
Really?
Yeah. Despite the Curie's fame as a scientist working for France, the public's attitude towards xenophobia, the same that had led to the Dreyfus affair, also fueled false speculation that Curie was Jewish. During this French Academy of the Scientists elections, it was vilified by the right-wing press as a foreigner and atheist. Her daughter later remarked on the French press's hypocrisy in portraying her as an unworthy foreigner when she was nominated for a French honor, but portraying her as a French heroine when she received foreign honors such as her Nobel Prize. In 1911, it was revealed that Curie was involved in a year-long affair with physicist Paul Langevin, a former student of Pierre Curie's, a married man who was estranged from his wife. That resulted in a press scandal which, exploited by her academic opponents, Curie, then in her mid-40s, was 5 years older than Langevin and was misrepresented in the tabloids as a foreign Jewish homewrecker. When the scandal broke, she was away at a conference in Belgium. On her return, she found an angry mob in front of her house and had to seek refuge with her daughters in the home of her friend Camille Marbeau. International recognition for her work had been growing to new heights, and the Royal Swedish Academy of Scientists, overcoming opposition, prompted the Langevin scandal, honored her a second time in 1911 with the Nobel Prize in Chemistry. The award was in recognition of her services to the advancement of chemistry by the discovering the elements of radium and polonium, by the isolation of the radium in the study of nature, and the compounds of this remarkable element. Because of the negative publicity due to her affair with Langevin, the chair of the Nobel Committee, Svante Arrhenius, attempted to prevent her attendance at the official ceremony for the Nobel Prize in Chemistry, citing her questionable moral standing.
Because that had something to do with her intelligence.
Oh, yeah. Curie replied that she would be present at the ceremony because the prize was given to me for her discovery of polonium and radium, and that there is no relation between her scientific work and the facts of her private life. Well, good for her. She was the first person to win or share 2 Nobel Prizes and remains alone with Linus Pauling as the Nobel laureates in 2 fields each, a delegation of celebrated Polish men of learning headed by novelist Henryk Słonowicz, encouraged her to return to Poland and continue research in her native country. Curie's second Nobel Prize enabled her to persuade the French government to support the Radium Institute, built in 1914, where the research was conducted in chemistry, physics, and medicine. A month after accepting the 1911 Nobel Prize, she was hospitalized with depression and a kidney ailment. For most of 1912, she avoided public life, but did spend time in England with her friend and fellow physicist Hertha Arturian. She returned to her laboratory only in December, after a break of about 14 months. In 1912, the Warsaw Scientific Discovery offered her a directorship of the new laboratory in Warsaw, but she declined, focusing on developing the Radium Institute to be completed in 1914 and on a new street named Rue Pierre Curie. She was appointed director of the Curie Laboratory in the Radium Institute in the University of Paris, founded in 1914. She visited Poland in 1913 and was welcomed in Warsaw, but the visit was mostly ignored by the Russian authorities. The Institute's development was interrupted by the coming war, as most of the researchers were drafted into the French army, and it fully resumed its activities in 1919. Well, during World War I, Curie recognized that wounded soldiers would best be served if operated on as soon as possible. She saw the need for field radiological centers near the front lines to assist battlefield surgeons, including to alleviate amputations when, in fact, limbs could be saved. After a quick study of radiology, anatomy, and automotive mechanics, she procured X-ray equipment, vehicles, auxiliary generators, and developed mobile radiography units, which could be popularly known as Petites Curies or Little Curies. She became the director of the Red Cross Radiology Service and set up France's first military radiology center, operational in late 1914. Assisted at first by a military doctor and her 17-year-old daughter Irene, Curie directed the installation of 20 mobile radiological units and another 200 units at field hospitals in the first year of the war. Later, she began training other women as aides. Now, in 1915, Curie produced hollow needles containing radium emanation, a colorless radioactive gas given off by radium, later identified as radon, to be used in sterilizing infected tissue. She provided the radium for her own 1-gram supply, and it is estimated over 1 million wounded soldiers were treated with her X-ray units. Busy with this work, she carried out very little scientific research during the period. In spite of her humanitarian contributions to the French war effort, Curie never received any formal recognition from the French government. Also, promptly after the war started, she attempted to donate her gold Nobel Prize medals to the war effort, but the French National Bank refused to accept them. She did buy war bonds using her Nobel Prize money. She said, "I'm going to give up the little gold I possess. I shall add to this the scientific medals, which are quite useless to me. There is something else. By sheer laziness, I had allowed the money from my second Nobel Prize to remain in Stockholm in Swedish crowns. This is the chief part of what we possess. I'd like to bring it back here and invest it in war bonds. The state needs it. Only, I have no illusions. The money will probably be lost." She also was an active member of the committees of Polonia in France, dedicated to the Polish cause. After the war, she summarized her wartime experiences in the book Radiology in War, published in 1919. Well, in 1920, for the 25th anniversary of the discovery of radium, the French government established a stipend for her. Its previous recipient was Louis Pasteur. In 1921, she was welcomed triumphantly when she toured the United States to raise funds for the research on radium. Mrs. William Brown Maloney, after interviewing Curie, created the Marie Curie Radium Fund and helped raise money to buy radium, publicizing her trip. In 1921, President Warren G. Harding received her at the White House to present her with 1 gram of radium collected in the United States, and the First Lady praised her as an example of a professional achiever who is also a supportive wife. Before the meeting, recognizing her growing fame abroad, and embarrassed by the fact that she had no French official distinctions to wear in public, the French government offered her a Legion of Honor award, but she refused. In 1922, she became a Fellow of the French Academy of Medicine. She also traveled to other countries, speaking publicly and giving lectures in Belgium, Brazil, Spain, and Czechoslovakia. Now, led by Curie, the Institute produced 4 more Nobel Prize winners, including her daughter Irene Joliot Curie and her son-in-law Frederick Joliot Curie. Eventually, it became one of the world's 4 major radioactive research labs, the others being the Cavendish Laboratory, the Ernest Rutherford, the Institute for Radium Research in Vienna with Stefan Meyer, and the Kaiser Wilhelm Institute for Chemistry with Otto Hahn and Lise Meitner. In August of 1922, Marie Curie became a member of the League of Nations' newly created International Committee of Intellectual Cooperation. She sat on the committee until 1934 and contributed to the League of Nations' scientific coordination with other prominent researchers, including Albert Einstein, Hendrik Lorentz, and Henry Bergson. In 1923, she wrote a biography about her late husband titled Pierre Curie. In 1925, she visited Poland to participate in the ceremony of laying of the foundations of Warsaw's Radium Institute. Her second American tour in 1929 succeeded in equipping the Warsaw Radium Institute with radium. The institute opened in 1932 with her sister Bronswala, its director. These distractions from her scientific labors and the attendant publicity caused her much discomfort but provided her resources for her work. In 1930, she was elected to the International Atomic Weight Committee, on which she served until her death. In 1931, Curie was awarded the Cameron Prize for Therapeutics in the University of Edinburgh. Now, Curie visited Poland for the last time in early 1934. A few months later, on the 4th of July, 1934, she died at age 66 at the Satrament Sanatorium in Passy, Haute-Savoie, from aplastic anemia, believed to have been contracted from her long-term exposure to radiation, causing damage to her bone marrow. The damaging effects of ionizing radiation were not known at the time of her work, which had been carried out without safety measures later developed. She had carried test tubes containing radioactive isotopes in her pocket. She had stored them in her desk drawer, remarking on the faint light that substances gave off in the dark. Curie had been exposed to X-rays from unshielded equipment while serving as a radiologist in field hospitals during the war. In fact, Curie's body was exhumed in 1995. The French Office Protection contre les rayons ionescents concluded that she could not have been exposed to lethal levels of radium while she was alive. They pointed out that radium poses a risk only if it's ingested, and speculated their illness was most likely been due to her use of the radiography during the First World War. Well, she's interred in the cemetery in Sicho, along with her husband Pierre. 60 years later, in 1995, in honor of their achievements, the remains both were transferred to the Paris Pantheon. Their remains were sealed in a lead lining because of the radioactivity. She became the second woman to be interred at the Pantheon after Sophie Berthelot, the first woman to be honored with the interment of the Pantheon on her own merits. Because of the levels of radioactive contamination, her papers from 1890 are considered too dangerous to handle. Even her cookbooks are highly radioactive. Her papers are kept in lead-lined boxes. Those who consult them must wear protective clothing. In her last year, she worked on a book, Radioactivity, which was published posthumously in 1935. But here was a lady, in her time, she overcame difficulties time and time again, be it political, be it sexist. She was a brilliant lady, and our history is better for what she provided to the world. So, but this is my happy first chapter in Women's History Month. The Bearded Historian says, folks, have a good day out there.
Good night, peoples. Oh, my phone is low.